But let's start. Okay, so I request Professor Eknath Gate, the Dean of Maths Faculty, to address this gathering. So we have gathered here today in memory of Professor M.S. Narasimhan. So I request Eknath Gate to start.
So good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, wherever you are in the world. And again, apologies for this late start. I hope there will be no echo this time. So Professor Ramakrishna, members of the organizing committee, Professor Raghunathan, Professor Nitzke, Professor Ramdas, and Professor Rajan, and some of our colleagues from ISC, collaborators, friends, and family of Professor Narasimhan, colleagues from the School of Mathematics, and ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this memorial service for Professor Narasimhan today. We have gathered here today to say goodbye and reminisce to perhaps one of the greatest mathematicians of post-independence India. Before I hand over the floor to Professor Ramakrishna, our director, I'd like to just say one or two very quick words. Professor Narasimhan joined the Institute in the early 50s and perhaps retired in the early 90s, whereas I joined the Institute in the late 90s, so we didn't have much direct overlap with him, but his presence was always very much felt in the Institute, not just because he was talking to younger colleagues, for example, Professor Holla, a friend of mine, but also because he would visit several times during conferences and international colloquia and things like that. But I wanted to say that perhaps maybe a more direct sort of connection with Professor Narasimhan was made in my mathematical life when a few years ago we were running a seminar in number theory, and he works more in algebraic geometry, at least at that time. And his work was sort of completely foundational to what was happening in this seminar, which was extremely surprising to me. If I can just be technical for a few seconds, a few years ago, Fontaine and Farg invented this curve, which studying it allows us to reprove many of the main theorems in p-adic Hodge theory. And one of the main tools they use is to classify the vector bundles on this curve. And a key role is played by the Harder-Narasimhan filtration. And during this seminar, we saw how frequently this notion was used. And on this very strange curve, these authors, Farg and Fontaine, showed that the Harder-Narasimhan filtration was split. And so you got a very nice theorem about the vector bundles on this very strange curve, much like the theorem about vector bundles on P1. Namely, they're a direct sum of line bundles, but this time the line bundles are indexed not by integers, but by rational numbers. So that was a very, very interesting experience for me. And I mentioned it to him once at tea, and he said, yes, I've heard of Farg, but our conversation did not go beyond that. But I think a mark of the greatness of a mathematician is when his ideas permeate many other fields. The second thing I wanted to say is that while reading some obituaries recently, it struck me how many administrative positions Professor Narasimhan occupied, not just Dean of the School of Maths, but also he headed the Maths Department in ICTP, and also he chaired the NBHM, the National Board of Higher Mathematics, etc. And what struck me is when maybe a journalist or another mathematician was interviewing him and asked him about this, and he said that he always found administrative duties not taxing on his time, and he could do them on the side. And he offered some advice as well, saying that when you have a tough administrative decision, always defer it to the next day. And that helped him a lot. And I took a lot of, I found this advice very heartwarming, because I think several of us in the math department, several people who are much junior than him, have struggled with various administrative duties. And I think it was very inspiring to hear these words. So I think we have a very nice group of people collected here and a very nice event set up. And I would, without further ado, like to invite our director of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Professor Ramakrishnan, to please address the audience.
Thank you, Eknath. Good afternoon, dear friends and colleagues. Entire TIFR, including the Governing Council of TIFR, deeply regrets the passing away of Professor M.S. Narasimhan on 15th May. He was a great mathematician. I'm sure many of the mathematicians are going to talk about him. He made pioneering contribution in many branches of mathematics and an important architect in his time in making TFR Math School as one of the top 3 in the world. He joined TFR as a graduate student in 1953, became a faculty member in 1960. He became a professor of eminence, extremely rarest of rare people only would get that, and he fully reserved that in 1990, and he superannuated in 1992. But the TFR Council offered him the honorary fellow in 94, which he accepted. And I am not a mathematician, but I can appreciate the great results from him. And in the 75 years of TFR, he's worked with another eminent mathematician, Professor C.S. Seshadri. So it's called Narasimhan Seshadri theorem. And that is the landmark achievement. If you want a singular piece of work in the 75 years, it is that one. And it will be there always, I think, for years to come. And he is not only a great mathematician, he was also a good administrator. And also, many of his students are eminent mathematicians here today, and they are here to pay homage to him. And it was mentioned that he was a founder chairman of the National Board of Higher Mathematics of the Government of India. In 1983, it was set up. I think Professor Raghunathan here played also a crucial role. And he was also, I was told that he is instrumental in setting up a formal graduate school in mathematics in 1984. He remained associated with TFR, although he was in Bangalore, through these TFR centers in Bangalore. And I am probably had the least exchange with him among the speakers here today. My last exchange was with him through an email where he asked me whether he can get a VPN address to access the journals in TFR. That was on 31st December 2020. So we were glad and immediately complied to his request. And 3rd January, he thanked me and also the staff, for getting him this access to these journals. And he said, "You made my life today." And, I do all kinds of things as a director here. And also, this message for me was like a tonic on that day. I mean, my day was made when this letter came from him. And I think we have lost a great scholar and a great mathematician. And my heartfelt condolence to his wife, Mrs. Sauntala Narasimhan, his daughter, Professor Shobhana Narasimhan, and his son, Narasimhan. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ramakrishnan. So we now present a series of video messages and of appreciation and homages by friends. We start with video messages. This entire program will go on for around 1.5 hours, and it will end with a selection of video clips taken from the interview of Narasimhan. But first, we start with video messages. This will go on for around 35 minutes. So the first video message will be on by Professor Nitin Mitsure. This will be on his life and work, Narasimhan's life and work.
This is a presentation on Narasimhan's life and mathematics. Narasimhan spent his childhood in the village of Thandarai, which is in the state of Tamil Nadu in the south of India. His family were land-owning farmers. Thandarai had a primary school which had classes 1 to 5, and there was exactly one teacher who looked after all the classes. For high school, he went to another village about 5 miles away, going by bullock cart or walking every day. He became attracted to mathematics at about age 13 or 14. And he was exposed to some textbooks for older students, which he found very attractive. In particular, he liked to solve difficult riders, that is, problems in geometry. As he has explained in an interview, mathematics gave him an opportunity to think for himself. And that was very important for him. After finishing high school, Narasimhan went to the city of Chennai, formerly called Madras, for his BA. That was those were the years 1948 to 52. C.S. Seshadri was his classmate, and that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. They were taught by Father Racine, who was a Jesuit priest and was a student of Elie Carta. Racine had kept himself informed of many of the latest developments in mathematics, and he introduced modern mathematics to his Indian students, and he used textbooks such as Van der Waerden, which were very influential. After their BA, Racine advised Narasimhan and Seshadri to go to the newly founded Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai for their PhD. This is a photo of Homi Bhabha with Racine. TIFR was founded by Homi Bhabha in 1945, and when India gained independence from colonial rule in 1947, Prime Minister Nehru gave his full backing to TIFR. Here's a photo of Homi Bhabha with Nehru and K. Chandrasekharan. K. Chandrasekharan was very young, about 32, when he joined Tata Institute in 1949, and he set up the School of Mathematics of TIFR in the form that we know today. In particular, he started a graduate school to train PhD students. His partner was another talented young mathematician, K.G. Ramanathan. And both Chandrasekharan and Ramanathan deeply influenced Narasimhan. KC, as Chandrasekharan was called, managed to get some very famous mathematicians to visit TIFR and gave short courses. And Narasimhan attended, in particular, courses by Ambrose Eilenberg and Laura Schwartz in these years. The TIFR students used to write lecture notes for such lecture courses by visitors, and they were published in the TIFR lecture note series. In addition to what the visitors taught them, Narasimhan and Seshadri ran their own seminar on various topics, and they closely followed some of the latest material, such as the Seminar Kata volumes, as they arrived to the TIFR library. In those days, Narasimhan's main interest was analysis, and he was very influenced by Laura Schwartz. Narasimhan as well as Seshadri spent their postdoctoral years from 1958 to 63 years in Paris. Narasimhan was mentored by Schwartz, while Seshadri was mentored by Chevalier. One highlight of Narasimhan's stay in France was that he mastered the deformation theoretic papers of Kodera and Spencer. The other high point was he began his collaboration with Takeshi Kotake, who was also visiting Schwartz. In those early days, Narasimhan's research focused on mathematics. A landmark paper is the paper with Kotake in 1962. This is the title. But as the years passed, Narasimhan increasingly turned to algebraic geometry. However, analysis remained a powerful tool for him, and which he could deploy when needed. Narasimhan began his collaboration with Ramanan in 1960, and they proved a very important theorem in differential geometry about the existence of universal connections. Professor Ramanan's talk is going to feature in this meeting, and I won't say anything more about this because we will hear it from him. After Narasimhan and Seshadri rejoined Tata Institute in 1960, this time as faculty members, they continued their mathematical exploration together. A topic of their interest was the newly emerging area of holomorphic vector bundles on compact Riemann surfaces. In particular, they're intrigued by Andre Weill's question about what is the significance of unitary vector bundles on a compact Riemann surface, that is, vector bundles arising from unitary representations of the fundamental group. They had already been introduced to this question by K.G. Ramanathan even before they went to Paris. Narasimhan and Seshadri proved breakthrough results while they considered this problem. First, they constructed a complex analytic modularized space for irreducible unitary bundles and for stable bundles that use the Kodera-Spencer deformation theory. And then they proved the theorem which showed that the reducible unitary bundles are exactly the stable bundles in the sense of David Mumford. This is the famous Narasimhan-Seshadri theorem, which has had a huge impact on mathematics. interesting new developments have kept coming out of this theorem and its generalizations for the last 50 years. It has even had some applications in physics. In the late 1960s, Narasimhan spent a year in IIS Princeton, and there he met and collaborated with Okamoto. Together, they gave a concrete geometric realization of the discrete series representations. These representations were then a new discovery of Harishchandra. The proof uses Narasimhan's tools of elliptic partial differential equations. Here's a photo of Narasimhan with Okamoto from 1974. For the next decade or more, Narasimhan intensively collaborated with Ramanan, as well as with many other collaborators like Harder internationally. And together, they established some of the most fundamental properties of the moduli spaces of vector bundles on curves. Here are the big three of vector bundle theory from Tata Institute, Narasimhan, Seshadri, and Ramanan. Narasimhan was a master of collaborative research. He knew how to so arrange things that the whole is considerably greater than the sum of the parts. He was very successful in this, and here is a list of collaborators of Narasimhan. He was also an inspiring research guide, able to get the best out of his doctoral students. Here's the list. I was very fortunate to be one of Narasimhan's students. And like many students of Narasimhan, I continued my contacts with Narasimhan all his life and learned a lot from him. I'd like to take this opportunity to put on record my profound gratitude for Narasimhan. Narasimhan retired from TIFR in 1992, and then he joined ICTP at the invitation of Salam as the head of mathematics and spent about 10 years in Trieste. There he mentored a large number of talented young mathematicians from all over the world and also organized some excellent instructional schools. We'll hear more about this period from some of the speakers in this meeting and the next meeting in Bangalore. With all this steady, important research output, inevitably, Narasimhan got lots of honors and recognitions. And here's a list of some of the prizes. Here are some of the fellowships of learned academies and an honorary doctorate. All through, Narasimhan was a leader of mathematical organizations and institutions and a very good administrator. Some of the positions that he held at different times in his career are listed here. Narasimhan said that he learned the art of leadership, organization, administration by watching Casey in action. And in particular, he used to quote a certain, well, perhaps a poem by Rabindranath Tagore, which Casey had brought to his attention. Here is that poem in English. We were not able to find the Bengali original though. And so Narasimhan truly acted as per this poem, and he never resented the considerable time that he had to take away from his research for his leadership and administrative activities. Here are some images of Narasimhan. Here he is with his friend Divakaran, a distinguished physicist. Here he is with Mumford and Ramdas. Narasimhan was very fond of the game of bridge from his Paris days onwards. Here is a rare photo of Narasimhan wearing a t-shirt, unlike his usual elegant suits. Here he is with Arma Borel. And here he is giving a lecture. He was a very clear expositor. Here is Narasimhan's family. This is Shakuntala Narasimhan, his wife. This is Mohan, their son, and this is Shobhana, their daughter. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a photo of all four together. Here is Narasimhan with the members of the School of Maths office staff in TIFR. And here is an image of Narasimhan with Yuri Manin, on the terrace of Tata Institute in the 1960s. Narasimhan shifted to Bangalore in 2004, and though he was getting old, he continues his active involvement in research, mentoring, referring, committee work to the end. His last preprint on the Math Archive was posted just a day before his death. His friends remember him as a gracious host who enjoyed the company of the young and old. And we will all miss the great parties in his house with sparkling conversation and good wine. But whatever he did, there was always a deep seriousness which underlay everything that he said or did. From wherever we are in the world today, we join together to salute his memory. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ray, for a wonderful presentation of the history of, a brief history of the work of Narasimhan and his life. We now begin with a series of video messages from his friends and colleagues. As I said, this will be of 35 minutes duration. We'll hear from Ramanan, Harder, Newstead, Hitchin, Parthasarthi, Anand Swarup, Divakran, Shravan Kumar, Goethe, Ramdas, and Burgren.
Two of the finest mathematicians who put TAFR on the international map were C.S. Seshadri and M.S. Narasimhan. Sadly, both passed away within a year of each other. As one who had a close association with MSN for over 60 years in various capacities, it's a loss difficult to come to terms with. Soon after I joined TAFR as a graduate student, he was deputed to France thanks to the assistance of Laurent Schwartz. He worked there with a student of Schwartz called Takeshi Kotake, a Japanese, and got an interesting result on partial differential equations, particularly elliptic equations. When he returned, I was a graduate student, and he warmed up to me when he found that I was conversant with the work of Kodaira and Spencer. Most of the students, including some postdocs, were then staying at the Old Yacht Club hostel, previously occupied by the servants of the club. Emerson, as well as Seshadri, on their return from France, did not stay in the hostel any longer, but in some digs nearby called the LinkedIn Court. I vividly remember his coming down one evening and waiting in the wings of the tennis court for my turn to finish. When I was through, he asked me if I had any problem to work on, since I seem to have learned a lot of sophisticated mathematics. I told him that the unitary universal bundle, being a homogeneous bundle, had a natural connection, and wondered if it might be universal for all unitary connections as well. He got all excited and we started working on it that night itself. Both Homi Baba, the director, and K. Chandrasekharan, the deputy director of mathematics, used to say often that students should learn science and work hard. PhD should not be the aim, but a byproduct. I thought this was only a question of making a virtue of necessity, since there were very few to guide students towards substantial work which would fetch them a doctorate. After having written a few papers, a couple of them on connections with MSN, which were very well received, I asked him if I should not start working for my thesis. He immediately said, "You are comfortable with homogeneous spaces. A Japanese called Issei has raised some questions on homogeneous bundles, and see if you can address those." I did, and that constituted most of my thesis. It was a pleasure to work with Narasimhan right from the beginning. although he was interested in art and literature, particularly in Tamil, most of the time we were together, we discussed mathematics, be it a walk on the Marine Drive, lunch at the Majestic, or snacks at the coffee house. I have had many firsts with him. I was his first student. I was the first to publish a joint paper with him. His paper with Kotaki appeared 1 year later. The first summer school held by TIFR, which was on topology, was jointly organized by us. I was the first secretary and he the first chairman of the National Board for Higher Mathematics. He was also a close friend and we had personal friendship over the years. And to me, his demise is a deep personal loss. Thank you.
Dear friends and colleagues at the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research, this is really a very sad moment that I join you again at the Tata Institute to memorize Narasimhan and send a message for Narasimhan to this place. I felt very sorry when I received the messages that Narasimhan had passed away a few weeks ago. I met Narasimhan the first time in my life in 1970 at the International Congress in Nice. And I was kind of surprised why he was so much interested in my work. But it turned out that he had contact with André Weil and discussed with him the Weil conjectures for the modular space of vector bundles at Mumbai, at Bombay. And Narasimhan invited me to come to the institute, Tata Institute in 1972 for the international colloquium, which actually took place only in 1973. And since then, I had I visited the Tata Institute very frequently, and it was always a pleasure for me to work with him and the other colleagues at the Tata Institute. So this way I had kind of very frequent visit of the Tata Institute. He also visited me in Bonn, and we met again at several places in the world, also at the International Congress in Kyoto, and we always had interesting and inspiring discussions. In retrospect, I'm very happy that I made up my mind to visit him in 2019 at the ICTP, when he was visiting the ICTP, and I visited him for a couple of days, and again it was the same. We had very interesting and discussions about vector bundles and Tamagawa numbers. So he was really one of my best friends and colleagues, and the only thing I want to say, Narasimhan, rest in peace. Günther.
I would like to begin by thanking the organisers of this meeting for inviting me to talk. Anne and I first met Narasimhan in the autumn of 1965, when he and Seshadri visited Liverpool for 2 months. This was the beginning of a long friendship. At the time of this visit, I had essentially completed the work on my thesis, but was still in the process of writing it up, so discussions with Narasimhan and Seshadri were of great help. This was indeed the beginning of my career as a research mathematician. I am not sure in what direction I would have gone had it not been for them, and I am extremely grateful towards them. In 1975, I visited TIFR for 10 weeks. During that time, I gave a series of lectures on GIT and moduli spaces, which turned into a book. I had many discussions with Narasimhan, and the final chapter in the book was a collaboration with him. This was our only actual collaboration, although I made a lot of use of his work in mine. One of my most treasured mathematical possessions is his 2-volume collected works. I have made direct use of at least 11 of the papers of which he was an author. Narasimhan also introduced me to some of his descendants, including Usha Desali, now Usha Bosley, who has become a close friend. We made 2 visits to ICTP at Narasimhan's invitation during his period as Director of Mathematics, for 1 week in 1998 and for a month in 1999. The second of these was at the time of the solar eclipse, about 70% as I remember. Narasimhan also introduced us to some of the excellent restaurants in Trieste. In 2002, I had the honor of speaking at the conference for his 70th birthday, also at ICTP. Narasimhan also spoke at several VBAC meetings, including the conference for my 65th birthday in Mexico in 2006. At the program on moduli spaces at the Newton Institute in 2011, of which I was principal organizer, Narasimhan came for 1 month as Rothschild Distinguished Visiting Fellow. In fact, he was responsible for a change in the rules for this position. Previously, it had been a professorship at the University of Cambridge. However, Cambridge had a rule that no appointment to a chair could be made beyond the age of 67. We were adamant that we wanted Narasimhan, so the Institute changed the title of the position and the appointment went ahead. We also met on a number of occasions in Madrid, including the conference for his 80th birthday in 2012, at which again I had the honour of speaking. The last time we met was at the VBAC meeting in Warwick in 2015. Narasimhan continued to work on mathematics and had many stimulating ideas. To me, his death seems like the end of an era.
I was very sorry to hear that Narasimhan passed away. It seemed strange not to see the familiar figure at conferences, the dark suit, the pullover and tie, even in hot weather, at least hot for an Englishman, and listen to his mathematical observations and suggestions and his stories of mathematicians in the past. He'll be greatly missed. We first met in the 1970s when I was a postdoc. It was at a conference in Durham, and during the excursion, the bus had broken down outside a pub. We sat together and discussed the topic of my talk, which was about vanishing theorems and Weizenbach formulas in differential geometry. And he asked me if I'd read Weizenbach's book on the invariant theory, which was published in the 1920s. Well, I'd kind of skimmed through it in the library, but then he told me to look at the foreword and to take the first letters of each sentence. And what they read is, in German, "Down with the French." Well, that was my first experience of Narasimhan. Down with the French was obviously not his opinion, because his time in Paris made him maybe the most European of our Indian visitors and colored his mathematical research in many different ways. Mathematically, we converged in the 1980s when I wrote my paper on what are now called Higgs bundles. I'd sent him a draft, and talking to him later, we both liked the same features that appeared in it, such as the way the uniformization theorem dropped out rather naturally. He also suggested that I should call the equations the Hitchin equations, which of course was very kind, but not something that I could do anything about. And it seems he did suggest it to others. Anyway, it was this interaction which grew and grew, and thanks largely to Oscar Garcia's energy and initiative, provided many chances to discuss in the following years in many different places, in Spain, in Mexico, France, England, and so we spoke together much more in that period. One abiding memory I have is going to the Tata meeting in 1990, which was a joint celebration of the 60th birthdays of Narasimhan and Seshadri. There were some great talks, and it all ended with what was called a felicitatory tea. So we sat at tables on the lawn, served by turbaned waiters, echoes of the Raj there. And as the sun went down, we listened to long speeches of congratulation and appreciation, which would not be out of place today. But Tata had an early retirement policy, and soon I was visiting Narasimhan in Trieste. So I was put as an external member on a number of committees, which gave me not only the opportunity to talk once more about mathematics, but also to observe how concerned he was with helping mathematicians in the developing world. When ICTP gave him the Spirit of Abdus Salam Award last year, it was an opportunity for many of us to express our appreciation to Narasimhan personally. Today, we can do the same, but in a rather different audience. He was a brilliant mathematician, a real gentleman, and a wonderful guide to the delights of mathematical research.
Around the end of 1969, Emerson suggested a very interesting problem to generalize his famous work with Okamoto to spin-off bundles using the Dirac operator. Their collaboration happened in the home ground of Harishchandra. Okamoto once told me that while Okamoto would attend Harishchandra's lectures, Emerson would work in the library and bring deep analytical inputs and working ideas and insight to discuss. Besides what I had learned in literary, Emerson suggested Helgerson's book. Costin from MIT had come and gone. As official notes writer, my time was spent mostly for that. No benefit for me from this for Emerson's problem. Then began a short period of total devotion to the Emerson Okamoto preprint, with Emerson closely monitoring my progress and understanding. Very soon things took a positive turn, and I began to write an algebraic expression for the Dirac operator on general Riemannian symmetric spaces and calculated its square. Narasimhan was extremely pleased with this significant step. The project was coming to a fruitful closure, and I had applied for leave. Emerson rejected my leave application, all for my own benefit. Leave is not a matter of right, he retorted vociferously. He personally carried my manuscript to the Nice Congress in 1970. From the time of my TIFR selection interview till he left TIFR in 1992, he had influenced me a lot, far beyond being my thesis advisor. Post-PhD, I continued to keep him updated about my later interests and research. In 1974, I shifted from Brahmagupta flatlet to Bhaskara apartment. We will discuss many aspects of representation theory in his room, in my room, sometimes both morning and afternoon, and on the way back home in the evening. In Bhaskara colonnade, my lift comes first, but he would hold me and continue discussion, all the while carrying 3 or 4 heavy volumes for his reading. If I were to be reborn in another birth as a mathematician, I wish to have all these precious and priceless experiences with Emerson reborn as my guide. I attended all special events marking his milestones. Also the joint Emerson Seshadri 60th birthday event in TIF Blazers. At a social event on the East Lawn, as part of the proceedings, being the dean, I had to talk covering several aspects, including personal reminiscences. It was followed by high tea at the faculty lounge. At the faculty room, Emerson was in high spirits, complimenting me for my speech. He will go join others, but bounced back to me and praised me once more, enthusiasm not diminished even a little bit. He graciously accepted Venkatamana's invitation. It is amazing how, in the 1 week after Emerson's passing away, we are all able to recall and recollect what we thought were most insignificant interactions with Emerson, but now they come back to us with value enhanced and multifold. Narasimhan used to say, think off the top. I cannot help thinking. Do not castigate me as being frivolous, certainly not. I cannot help thinking that as he embarked on his celestial voyage, he stopped by at the TIFR library to browse through some publications to ponder over in his final resting place. Every one of us who can proudly call ourselves colleagues and felt his awe-inspiring presence through our veins in the third floor corridor of School of Mathematics will vouch for the fact that we carry a spark of Emerson's soul when a mathematical insight suddenly pops up before our intuition.
I first met Narasimhan in 1964 when I joined Tata Institute as a research student. He was joined 11 years earlier. He was already a bit of a star there. But he was very friendly right from the beginning, maybe because we were both students of Father Racine in Loyola College earlier. Already interested in topology, which was not one of his specialties. So it was more friendship and brotherly guidance rather than mathematical guidance. Then around third year also, I remember we used to go out for beer together to some joint in Colaba Causeway. That's how it continued. So in 68, 4 years after I joined, he decided that he came up with an intervention. He thought he saw some Nuffield Foundation fellowships to England. He thought I may be eligible for it. So he started preparing me for the fellowship. So first, by the time I had 3-4 papers, so he asked me which university I was interested in. I said Liverpool because Terry Wall was there. So he sent my papers to Wall. And then, so asked Wall if it's agreeable to him, whether he could send a letter of support, which Wall did. Then he started coaching me for the interview. So I was known for a bit of a bull in a china shop. So he coached me, I should be polite to the interviewers and so on. So I went for the interview. One of them, I think it's Kothari or somebody, he asked me to name 2 of the greatest theorems in topology. So I said, oh, it's a silly question. And so interview went on like that. I came back and told Narasimhan that I followed his advice because I said silly instead of saying it was stupid. So to my surprise, I got the fellowship. And that turned to be somewhat important in my career. And I met Peter Scott there. We collaborated for more than 30 years later on. Yes. And that's, of course, Narasimhan went on to do bigger things, both mathematically as well as in the development of mathematics in India. Our acquaintance continued, and I used to see him a bit in Bangalore, and I was hoping to see him again until this news came.
I first met Narasimhan after his return to TIFR from Paris in 1960, I think. I was a first-year student working my way through Dirac's book, frequently tripping over some conceptual novelty or the other. One of them was this thing called the delta function. I happened to mention my perplexity over coffee, and Narasimhan, whom I barely knew, listened with his habitual attentiveness and tried to explain to me what a distribution is. Typically, he took the trouble to read the relevant section of the book, and next time we met, said something to the effect that it was surprisingly sound coming from a physicist. Narasimhan got interested in gauge theories because became a physicist, in other words, in the mid-1970s, by his own account in the perceptive interview of him by Sudhir Rao. As a close witness to those years, I personally acquired the belief, or maybe just the illusion, that there is no call to fear the mathematics that good physics often led to. There was help at hand, despite or because of his own insistence on clarity and logical soundness. He always had time for the fuzzy question that physicists like me often asked. His responses often open new vistas of possibilities, as I know from experience. The intellectual generosity went with an openness to new interests that surprised me when I first met it. During my years in Bangalore, we used to have the habit of meeting for a few hours every few weeks. I was working on my book and couldn't stop talking about what I was discovering, the best of gems of Inaryabhata's words of India's mathematical past. Some of us here will not be surprised to know that he was quite skeptical in the beginning. In these days of synthetic history, who can blame him? Eventually, his open-mindedness won. Yes, the work of Madhava and his line is in fact infinitesimal calculus. D'Alembert's La métaphysique du calcul, a phrase he was very fond of. But make it clear that they only dealt with trigonometric functions. The real aha moment came later, after I described to him how the Malayalam text Yukti Bhasha defined polynomials in the abstract through the algebraic properties of sequences of their coefficients, including the identification of the variable as the sequence 1, 0. He phoned me a few days later, quite excited, to say how impressed he was by the modernity of the idea. The Burbashist in him must have been pleased. In the evening of the 2nd of May, as the election results came in, I called him with a celebratory glass in my hand, as I had promised. We rejoiced across the phone line, and I emptied the glass on behalf of both of us, but also on my part in celebration of his own life.
Remembering Professor M.S. Narasimhan, I am saddened to learn Professor Narasimhan's passing away. It is a personal loss to me and a great loss for the mathematical community and all associated with him. I hold him with utmost respect, not only for all the beautiful mathematics he created, of which I have learned only a tiny bit, but his integrity, administrative capability, and care for all those associated with him. On a personal note, I vividly remember that while I was a graduate student, one day he called me to his office and explained to me a problem. But more importantly, he told me how to go about working on a problem. To this day, I try to follow his advice when I think about a problem. He was the one who introduced me to the problem surrounding the Verlinde formula, which became among one of the important projects I pursued for a while, mostly jointly with him and also some with A. Ramanathan, and finally wrote a book recently on that subject. I visited Professor Narasimhan at ICTP during 1994. He was very warm and caring. It is simply amazing that in spite of all the pain and suffering he was going through in the recent times, he wrote a paper with Gallego and Garcia Prada, which appeared on the archive on 13th May 2021, just a couple of days before he passed away. It is a testimony to his utmost devotion to mathematics. Bye.
I've known Professor Narasimhan for many years. He was my colleague and my superior. He advised me and he was a friend. He was an outstanding mathematician and an outstanding person. He changed mathematics and he changed the lives of many people, also mine. He built mathematics here at ICTP. I first met him when I was a student and he sought me out to encourage me about my thesis. Later, he hired me to ICTP. He showed me both by his advice and by his example how I should do my work here. After he retired, he still came back every year as a visitor or as a member of the Scientific Council, and he was always interested in my progress and in the progress of ICTP. He was very generous with his advice, so I often saw him in the bar of ICTP or in his office, listening to visitors, discussing with them, giving advice. He had a great gift for finding talent in people and bringing it to fruit by steering them in the right direction, by letting them look at the right kind of problems. He had a lot of patience, taking all the time that was necessary, listening and giving advice. I benefited from his advice myself, mathematically, for my tasks here at ICTP, and also as a person. he was an example for me. He was also joyful, he liked good company, and he had so many interesting stories to tell at dinner or over coffee. I will miss him.
Narasimhan's going is a great personal loss that I had not yet come to terms with. I will only say now that it was my enormous good fortune to have had him as my teacher. I wish to convey brief messages from Carlos Koenig, President of the International Mathematical Union, and Shigefumi Mori, former IMU President. Carlos wrote of his sadness at the passing of Narasimhan and Seshadri, whom he called two giants of our field. He said, "I knew R. Narasimhan very well, and he would often mention both of them. Please convey my condolences to the friends and families." Shigefumi wrote, "Thank you very much for letting me know that Narasimhan passed away a couple of days ago. Since my advisor, Masayoshi Nagata, was a close friend of Narasimhan and Seshadri, it is a big loss, and I sincerely express my condolences. I had known since my PhD days that they had strongly contributed to mathematics of India, but when I got involved in IMU, I also found out that their contribution to IMU was interwoven with their research activities. I especially admire the Indian algebraic geometers, and I believe that this is the source of strength of mathematics of India."
Dear Sakuntala Narasimhan, the Shobhana, dear Mohan, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, Professor Modumbai Narasimhan has been an outstanding mathematician whose contributions have received the highest recognition worldwide. A great promoter of the scientific collaboration between India and France, for which he was distinguished by the French Ordre du Mérite, and a dear friend of mine. I owe a lot to him because he was so generous each time I would call upon him. As you of course know, he was exposed to higher mathematics by Father Racine, who recommended him to Jean Leray. But it is Laurent Schwartz who made sure that in 1957, MS, as we used to call him, could secure a research position at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique. He then worked on partial differential equations under Schwartz's guidance, leading to his article with Takeshi Kotake, which appeared in 1960, the year when he decided to come back to the Tata Institute for Fundamental Research. It is through his proximity with Laurent Schwartz that I first got acquainted with him. Another group of French mathematicians were close to him, namely the Nice algebraic geometers, among which Jean-Michel Lemaire. As I was close to them too, and to the International Center for Pure and Applied Mathematics they were establishing there to promote actions towards developing countries, this gave me another opportunity to get in touch with him. Rather unexpectedly, at the 1982 General Assembly of the International Mathematical Union in Warsaw, I was charged as French delegate to convince MS to accept to run for membership to the IMU Executive Committee. He was indeed elected for the term 1983-1986. In this context, he became the chair of the Committee on Development and Exchange, CDE, for the period 1987-1994, and he asked me to serve as his secretary. This has been a period during which I learned a lot from him and could appreciate his always positive and friendly attitude, as well as his commitment towards acting in developing countries. Jean-Michel Lemaire invited MS to the Roundtable on International Cooperation at the 1987 Mathématiques Avenir meeting. He spoke, of course, of the cooperation between India and France, but also of the remarkable role played in India by the National Board for Higher Mathematics, NBHM, to the birth of which he contributed greatly. Actually, the NBHM served as a model to have an independent directorate for mathematics in the French ministry, a decision in 1988 that gave a big boost to the discipline in France. Who also interacted very positively when he was the head of the mathematics section at the ICTP in Trieste, had just become director of the Institut des Hautes Études Scientifiques and was eager to collaborate with the ICTP, an institute with a quite similar structure. Then again, exchanges with MSL were easy and talking with him always so inspiring. Later, when he was back in India, really made great efforts to help me reach out to key people when I tried to develop an Indian fund at IHES to give a more stable funding for visits to IHES by Indian scientists. Thanks to his introduction, I could meet a number of very interesting people and discuss how such a fund could be established. More recently, in May 2016, during the visit I paid to Bangalore as president of the European Research Council, ERC, I missed him as he was on a trip in Europe. But he helped me very much to see key people, and I could meet Shobhana. His advice to make the ERC efforts to get a cooperation agreement signed with the Indian SCRB have been invaluable. Thanks to his support, I could identify some key scientists on the Indian side who helped. The success was at the end of the road with the agreement signed at the India-EU summit in October 2017. Recalling the numerous great moments of exchange I had with MS makes him alive again for a few minutes. I cherish these memories. Thank you for inviting me to contribute and for your attention.
Okay. Thanks for all those who had sent in the video contributions. We are now going to show and read excerpts from a large number of written messages that we have received. This will take around 25 minutes. Okay. The first message is from Professor R.P. Bamba of Punjab University. He was a former Vice Chancellor of Punjab University. I am grateful to the organizers of this meeting for giving me the opportunity of paying my tribute to a great man, a good friend. About the time of independence, the visionary Homi Bhabha got TIFR established. After some time, he invited K. Chandrasekharan to take charge of the mathematics section. KC created the wonderful plan of getting good students from various places and arranging for them to interact with top mathematicians Bombay or abroad on delegation from TIFR. This resulted in some very good mathematics and emergence of a number of gifted young mathematicians. Among these people, there were some who clearly stood out: Narasimhan, Seshadri, and Raghunathan, with some others, of course. In Dyson's language, these people combined in themselves the qualities of frogs who concentrate on specific difficult problems and birds who fly high, get full view of the grand vistas, observe patterns, interlinks, and possibilities of unification. Emerson, formerly a geometer, made significant contributions to differential equations and physics. At the personal level, I'm proud of the fact that Emerson treated me as a friend, although of an older generation. During our 3-month stay in TIFR, more than 40 years ago, my wife and I often enjoyed the hospitality of Shakuntala and MS. Our then 10-year-old daughter played with Shobhana in the residential part of TIFR. Recently, MS called me to inquire about my health and to share our common memories of the exciting time we had in developing mathematics studies in our institutions during our younger days. Narasimhan will be missed for a long time by his family, his friends, his collaborators, his students, his colleagues, and his many admirers all over the world. The next message is from Dr. M.S. Valiyathan, who is a National Research Professor at Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal. I grieve over the demise of Professor M.S. Narasimhan, whom I admired deeply. We met only a few times at conferences or the annual meetings of the Indian Academy, but we took to each other easily. Once, when I referred to the law of the heart, Professor Narasimhan was amused. However, when he heard about the heart muscle functioning throughout life without fatigue, unlike skeletal muscle, and the law behind it, he became at once an interested listener. I sought Professor Narasimhan's advice and support during 2003-2004, when I was heading the Kerala State Council for Science and Technology, and I was keen to set up a school of mathematics in Kozhikode, not far from Tirukondiyur, where the legendary Kerala mathematicians flourished between 1400 to 1600 Christian era. On my request, Professor Narasimhan wrote a concept note on the proposed school focused on research. He envisaged the new school as an advanced research center, a place where the best mathematicians from India and abroad would meet to exchange ideas and hold conferences, a place that would, like a magnet, attract doctoral and postdoctoral students, a center equipped with the finest library and other facilities that would offer continuing education for mathematics teachers, a school in some ways similar to the Newton Institute in Cambridge. It was his note and goodwill which made it possible for me to persuade the NBHM, DAE, and Kerala government to support the project. So this school is known as the Kerala School of Mathematics. To me, the Kerala School of Mathematics, KSOM, will be a permanent reminder of the glory of ancient mathematicians in Kerala and my friendship with Professor Narasimhan, whose support to research in mathematics had no boundaries. Okay, so the next message is from Professor Troutman, who is at Kaiserslautern. It is painful to accept the loss of my close colleague and friend, MS Narasimhan. I can't believe that I cannot contact him anymore. I met MS Narasimhan the first time, 1981, at a conference in Trieste. The questions he asked me led to a very fruitful cooperation in the 1980s and to common publications. Moreover, I profited a lot from his very wide knowledge beyond the actual problems at that time. The cooperation led to many visits from him to Germany and my visits at the Tata Institute. At that time, MS Narasimhan was already highly recognized in the mathematical community, also in Germany. Once, when applying for support from the German Research Society, the chairman of the allocation committee, Friedrich Hirzebruch, gave his approval immediately, simply because of the appearance of Narasimhan's name. Besides mathematics, MS Narasimhan cared a lot for the well-being of his guests at the Tata Institute, making staying there very comfortable. Quite often, he invited us for dinner in selected restaurants, and I often remember these pleasant evenings. MS Narasimhan also arranged individual sightseeing and tours. Through him, we got to appreciate the Indian culture and history, and he introduced us to traditional and modern Indian music. The last time I met Narasimhan at the conference in Bangalore in honor of his 80th birthday, there his and his family's hospitality was as warm as ever, and we enjoyed meeting his family at his home. It was of immense value to have met the colleague and friend, MS Narasimhan. The next message is from Pranab Mitra, who is an emeritus research director with CNRS at Montpellier, France. He's a physicist. So Narasimhan was known around the world for his work in differential and algebraic geometry. He and Seshadri did much to nurture good mathematics and mathematicians. He was extraordinarily open to many branches of mathematics, and at a certain point in his life, to mathematical physics. If I am writing these lines, it is because of this. I first met Narasimhan when I passed through TIFR in the summer of 1978. At that time, I was working on gauge theories, which had also excited the interest of Atiyah, Hitchin, and Singer. And here at the TIFR, the interest of Narasimhan, who was working with his graduate student T.R. Ramdas on the geometry of gauge theories. This work led to important results in this subject. Narasimhan invited me for 2 months in 1979. I had many fruitful interactions with him, and he was always ready to help me. I found out what a fine analyst he was. Later, Narasimhan visited me in Paris as a visiting professor at the University of Paris 6. His seminars attracted a lot of people, especially Malayavan, who assiduously attended all of the lectures. As you might know, Narasimhan as well as Seshadri had a special relationship with France ever since their student days. Narasimhan recounted to me the following anecdote. When they were at the Institute Henri Poincaré in Paris, Henri Cautan was a host. Straight away, Cautan offered them the use of his office, saying that he had never came in anyway. I will cherish the memory of his for the friendship he offered me and for his extraordinary openness to the many currents which traverse science. The next message is from Professor N. Mukunda, again, a physicist from IISc Bangalore, mathematical physicist. I mainly enjoyed a warm personal relationship encompassing our families. Our familial contacts with MSN, Shakuntala, and Shobana were from June 1970 when we were at TIF. Shobana and our daughter Kamala, a couple of years apart in age, went to the Fort Convent in Kolava, often using a transport pool, and this brought our families together. In those years, I often saw MSN and other mathematicians at TIFR, but always from a respectful distance. One fact became clear to me, that Emerson was very special. It is my loss that I could not work with him or any of the others in that period. My later contacts with Emerson were mainly in Bangalore. About a decade ago, we overlapped at the Institute of Mathematical Sciences at Chennai, and only then did my wife and I fully comprehend the range and depth of his interests, going beyond mathematics, such as French and Tamil literature, the finer points of cuisine, and such things. We were, of course, in frequent contact with his family too. All these are cherished memories of a friendship with a truly great person, with one who helped create a school of mathematics in India of exceptional quality, who had a critical and independent mind on so many matters, and who cultivated and valued deep interest in many fields of academic, intellectual, and cultural endeavor. The following message is from Professor Herbert Langer of Erlangen. I am deeply saddened by the news that Narasimhan has passed away. He was not only just a colleague, but also a friend. We met many times and collaborated often, meaning that he always thought about my questions and mostly could answer them. First, we met in Nice, where I spent some months, and he a whole year, and where we shared an office. Soon we found a problem on vector bundles on curves, which led to our first joint paper. Afterwards, I spent 3 months at TIFR, where we continued our work. Narasimhan was several times in Erlangen, where we wrote our second joint paper, this time on abelian varieties. We also met at a lot of conferences and workshops, and always had great pleasure discussing things, not only mathematics. Finally, I want to say that I got to know Narasimhan as a very generous person, not only in mathematics. I think the whole mathematical community will miss him and feel the great gap which there will be without him. Lastly, I want to send my condolences to Mrs. Narasimhan. May she have some comfort. The next message is from Professor Gang Chiang, Emeritus Professor, Princeton University, and who overlapped with Professor Narasimhan at ICTP. I was very saddened by Professor Narasimhan's passing away. He was a great mathematician and made fundamental contributions to mathematics. When I was a graduate student in 1980s, I was led to study Narasimhan and Seshadri's paper on stable bundles over Riemann surfaces through the works of Donaldson and Uhlenbeck on Hermitian-Langmuir connection. It is a beautiful paper and has a great impact on the study of stable bundles on that moduli. I first met Narasimhan when I was visiting ICTP in 90s. We also served together as members of the Scientific Council for more than a decade. We discussed mathematics, especially geometric stability theory. We discussed on how ICTP can continue to play a crucial role in developing countries. We often shared the same opinion. I have enjoyed talking to him and learning a lot from his wisdom. Narasimhan also made outstanding contributions to advancing mathematical research and education in developing countries, especially in China. In the 90s, mathematical research level in China was not high after being isolated from outside world for long. Many young people were eager to learn advanced mathematics and tried to be involved in the forefront of mathematical research. ICTP provided extremely important opportunities. Many young people were invited to spend some time at ICTP by Narasimhan when he served as the head of the mathematics section of ICTP. These young people have played a crucial role in mathematical developments in China in the last 2 decades. Some of the Chinese postdoctors Narasimhan had advised became experts on algebraic geometry, and 4 of them became the head of School of Mathematical Sciences in leading universities. His work made the ICTP mathematics section flourish and world renowned. He will not be forgotten. The next message is from Professor Dresse, who is at GCU Paris. So I'm sad to hear that MS Narasimhan has passed away. I first met him at the Tata Institute in 1981, where I was working with C.S. Seshadri on an extended version of several talks made by them in Paris on varieties of semi-stable bundles on curves. I was still a student and I gave them a large part of my training in mathematics. I continued to work with MS Narasimhan on Picard group of moduli spaces, in particular during another stay at the Tata Institute in 1987. And I then met him on several occasions in ICTP in 3S, and the last time in 2012 during a conference in Bangalore for his 80th birthday. It has always been a pleasure to work and discuss with him. It has been a privilege for me to benefit from his advice. The next message is from P.N. Srikanth, who represents TIFR Center for Applicable Mathematics, Bangalore, with which Narasimhan had a very, very strong interaction. For me, it was an honor and privilege to have known MSN for almost 30 years. I'm yet to meet another person who was held in such high esteem for his professional achievements and for the gentleman he was. It was in early 1978 that I first met Professor Narasimhan. It was in a colloquium talk I gave in Mumbai TIFR, where I was a visiting member. This was followed by Professor Narasimhan asking me to meet him the next day. It was very hard for me to hide my nervousness when I went to meet him, but he immediately made me feel comfortable. At the end of about 30 minutes, he took me to the library and suggested what I should start studying if I wished to continue in the area I was working. This interaction led KG Ramanathan to request me to go to TIFR Bangalore, and that is how my journey in TIFR started. I do not know how many admirers of Narasimhan MSN know that he started his mathematical journey with a few papers on elliptic operators. The kind of impact these papers had is really extraordinary. Though he moved away from differential equations, he continued to keep track of the developments in analysis and partial differential equations. In fact, he gave a course on PDE and arranged to have seminar lectures on pseudo-differential equations in mid-80s at the TIFR Center in Bangalore. He followed very closely the activities of the center, even when he moved to ICT. It is due to this academic interest that he very strongly and actively supported the creation of TIFR CAM, the Center for Applicable Mathematics at Bangalore. I happened to be the dean at the time TIFR CAM became a reality. It is unbelievable the kind of support he gave to me, especially where appointments of new faculty was involved. He taught me how to read referee letters and also many times suggested names of his friends to whom we could write to double check. This went a long way in the way the center has developed. For him, the most important institution was always TIFR, and he was deeply attached to its progress and stature. His love for mathematics was strong. It was remarkable to see him attend a school on harmonic analysis we had arranged in 2014-15, where he would turn up every day to attend lectures and participate with an enthusiasm which is not easy to describe. Praying for his soul and wishing his family the strength to bear the loss. The next message is from Ashok Rena, who was from the theoretical physics group at TIFR. From my student days at TIFR, I remember Narasimhan's lectures to physicists on vector bundles, especially the simplicity and directness of his presentation. I really only got to know Narasimhan personally through my wife and in-laws who regarded him as an important family friend. He would talk Hindu philosophy with my father-in-law, Tamil literature with my mother-in-law, mathematics with my wife Purnima, and physics with me, all with the same animation and involvement. Around that time, a fruitful interaction between geometry and string theory was becoming established. Narasimhan became curious about what was going on in physics, and this led to numerous discussions between us. My real interaction with him came when I was struggling to understand the concept of a prime form on a compact Riemann surface. This is a quantity which had suddenly made its appearance in almost every paper related to string theory. It was defined by an ugly-looking expression, and I raised the question with Narasimhan. He showed me a lemma in a paper of his with Ramanan and explained its bearing on my question. He very quickly explained the basic ideas and the techniques involved. For me, it was a revelation. I could see that these techniques could provide a means to translate concepts coming from physics into precise mathematics. His encouragement and advice enabled me to begin to explore these ideas. In his long and distinguished career, Narasimhan has contributed to the work of many researchers, not only to his students and collaborators. Let me record another example. In a paper by the ICTP String Theory Group, which appeared in 1991, the crucial part of the argument requires the application of the theorem of Kazan and the use of the Bailey-Burrell compactification. The footnote attributes this argument to Narasimhan. How many times more there are of Narasimhan's contributions not to be found in his collected works, it would be impossible to estimate. The world has lost a great thinker, and it is a personal loss for me and my wife. We have lost a dear friend for whom we grieve. The next message is from T.N. Venkatramana, my colleague at the School of Mathematics, TIFR. Okay. Professor M.S. Narasimhan, or MSN as he was known among students in TIFR, was one of the best mathematicians in the world in his field and has inspired, directly or indirectly, many generations of mathematicians. His passing is a big loss to Indian mathematics. I would like here to recall some personal memories. I had heard of him even before I met him when I was an undergraduate in my hometown, Mysore. A mathematician there refused to apply for promotion unless Narasimhan was one of the examiners. I realized then that MSN had a reputation as an exacting judge. The first time I met him was during my entrance interview in TIFR. I felt then that he had an expressionless face and that my best answers seemed to be falling flat. However, after I was struggling with one of the problems, I seemed to get an idea of how to solve it. And he almost shouted, "Aha!" I felt that I was on the right track and solved the problem. This is typical of his kindness and generosity. He was almost gruff and forbidding in his demeanor, but when one got to know him, one realized how kind and generous he was with his ideas. I recall that even into his 80s, he had a tremendous passion and enthusiasm for mathematics. And I used to complain only half humorously that he tired me out with his questions. I'm going to miss him. The next message is from Professor Spentavadia, who's the architect of TIFR ICTS from Bangalore. I first got to know Narasimhan in 1984 when we began working on string theory. Our aim was to explore new models of string theory. In this connection, I had many useful discussions with Narasimhan. It was a pleasure to discuss with him, and he was very generous with his time. Once I gave a mini course in quantum mechanics to my mathematical colleagues at TIFR. Narasimhan later told me, to my surprise at the time, that concepts of physics are hard to comprehend. That was a surprise to me, as I thought that mathematics was hard. We overlapped a decade at TIFR. I very vividly remember Narasimhan speaking continuously and intensely about mathematics to his younger students and colleagues as they walked down the corridors or on the way to the canteen or along the seaside. By example, and perhaps even unconsciously, he made the point that within the institute, we should be intensely discussing subject and research rather than anything else. During my yearly visits to ICTP, I enjoyed his hospitality during many dinners with good Italian wine. The focus of our discussions was about how to do better in Indian science. Narasimhan served on the advisory board of ICTS from its beginning in August 2007 to 2013. I greatly benefited from his advice. More than his words, I felt supported by his presence. He was always there and was always very positive about ICTS and its trajectory. His last visits to ICTS was in February of 2020. At that time, ICTS organized a discussion session on the early days of mathematics at TIFR. Here, Narasimhan spoke at length about the early years that established the School of Mathematics at TIFR and the mathematical excellence that was achieved there. In his passing away, we in India and the world at large have lost a great mathematician and an inspiring mentor and builder of mathematical institutions. I have lost a great friend and someone whom I looked up to. My sincerest condolences to his family, students, and associates. The last message is from Dishant Pancholi, who is currently at Institute for Mathematical Sciences at Chennai. He was a younger colleague of mine at the Tata Institute. So I deem it a great privilege to have had the opportunity to be associated with Professor M.S. Narasimhan. I wish to quote two anecdotes which I believe will benefit anyone trying to pursue a career in research. One afternoon at the TIFR Center, this is at Bangalore, he gave me an important piece of advice which he nicknamed the BOD principle. He said, every day when you start working afresh, never do anything else for the first 3 to 4 hours except think about your research field. You will not get new ideas every day. So rewrite what you have understood, give slightly different proofs of things which are clear to you, or at the very least, copy the equations from your previous day's work neatly. No matter what happens, the first 3 to 4 hours of the day should be you and the problem. For the remaining time, you can learn some good mathematics. The reason for doing this, as Narasimhan explained, is obvious. Solving a problem is really hard. If you start your day reading interesting mathematics established by others, you will keep yourself busy at learning new mathematics, but avoid the real hard work, namely solving the problem that is dear to you. The second anecdote, a very favorite anecdote, very often when Emerson and I discussed if I get stuck explaining some ideas, he used to tell me, Dishant, whenever you get confused, pause and ask yourself, what would you do if you're on a deserted island and you need to develop all the concepts completely from scratch? Then the point up to which you can develop things from scratch is a point up to which you have understood completely and you clearly know where you need to start working. It is very rare that one gets to interact with someone like Narasimhan. He has shaped my career, my thinking, and my approach to mathematics, and for that, I'm forever grateful. Okay, I thank all those people who had sent in the written messages. The last talk is now by Professor M.S. Raghunathan, who was also a student of Narasimhan. This would go on for around 6.5 minutes.
Before I speak about Narasimhan, let me thank all of you who have assembled here to pay homage to his memory. The organization committee is grateful to his many friends who responded to our requests for messages. Many thanks to Nandagopal for his technical assistance. Our special thanks to Narasimhan's family for providing us with personal information about him. I saw Narasimhan for the first time sometime in my first year as a student at TIFR in 1960. He was dressed formally in a suit. To a student just out of college, that attire suggested a stiff, unapproachable persona. But I was soon disabused of that perception when one day he stopped me in the corridor to compliment me on my proof of a result that was making the rounds in the School of Mathematics. In my third year, I attended a seminar in differential geometry run by Narasimhan and Ramanan, then a senior student. Towards the end of the seminar, Narasimhan, Ramanan, and I were having frequent informal conversations. In these interactions, many of them over coffee, I learnt a great deal, and not just mathematics. My understanding of political and social issues came to acquire some sophistication. Narasimhan had an abiding interest in Tamil literature, and I came to learn a lot from him about Tamil writing. In the course of a few walks along the seashore at TIFR, he explained to me the entire Kodera-Spencer theory of complex structures. He was an outstanding teacher, excelling especially in one-on-one communication of mathematical ideas. He suggested a problem connected with the Kodera-Spencer theory for me to work on. When I eventually solved it, he told me that the work was adequate for a PhD and asked me to register for the degree with him as a thesis advisor, which I did. He interceded with the University of Bombay to get the waiting time for the submission of the thesis reduced to 2 years from the mandatory 3. He got me invited to speak at the prestigious International Mathematical Colloquium on Differential Analysis held in Bombay in January 1964 and made me rehearse my talk with him. That resulted in a well-received lecture, surprising colleagues who knew of my poor track record as a speaker. Around this time, I toyed with the idea of quitting mathematics to join my father in the family business. Narasimhan got wind of this, and when he happened to meet a friend of my family, told her that my quitting would be a loss for mathematics. This reached my family soon, and they promptly put an end to my ideas of changing my vocation. Narasimhan's role in my career thus went well beyond that of a mentor in mathematics, and this would be true of many of his other students. In 1966, I was inducted into the mathematics faculty at TIFR. From day one, Narasimhan and Seshadri treated me as an equal, but it was necessarily an asymmetric relationship. There was no way I could forget that he was my teacher. Our views on most issues were almost identical, but when we differed, I would invariably defer to his views. Our mathematical interactions continued, but they were less frequent and less intense as the focus of my mathematical interests had drifted away from his. Narasimhan took considerable interest in promoting mathematics in the country at large. Already in the 60s, he served on many committees of the universities as well as other institutions of higher learning. He was, of course, one of the principal architects of the rise of the School of Mathematics at TIFR from a minor player to a major one in the world of mathematics. In the early 70s, Jawaharlal Nehru University wanted to start a department of mathematics with him as the head. He was not averse to this idea, perhaps because he wanted to build another center rivaling the TIFR. Fortunately for TIFR, the project did not materialize, and Narasimhan continued to guide the School of Mathematics for another 20 years. When in 1983, the DIE set up the National Board for Higher Mathematics, an agency for the promotion of mathematics, he was a natural choice to head it. Under his leadership, the board took many initiatives which went a long way towards fulfilling its mandate. As a fellow member of the faculty and a member of NBHM, I had the good fortune of observing him at close quarters as an administrator, and there was plenty that I learned from him. He was a stickler for dignified and correct conduct on all occasions. He would wince when someone failed on that front. He planned and conducted meetings meticulously. His decisions were always taken after considerable thought. His letters were written with great care. He not only wanted to say the right things, but wanted them said the right way. During his ICTP years, my contacts with him were few and far between. I paid a few short visits to ICTP at his invitation, and they were very enjoyable. After he retired to Bangalore, the contacts with him were mostly on the telephone, but became much more regular. Narasimhan's approach to mathematics was very French, Bourbachian in fact. Riemann and Poincaré headed the pantheon of the greats whom he admired. Among his contemporaries, Kodera held pride of place in his admiration, and somewhat later, Grothendieck joined him, or maybe even displaced him. He once told me that the idea of the proof of Narasimhan-Seshadri theorem was inspired by Poincaré's method of balayage. Of Grothendieck, he told me, the man is amazing. Anytime you come up with a problem in the subject, you find that Grothendieck has already said something profound about it, or words to that effect. Narasimhan, unlike many of comparable stature, was accessible, and interactions with him, whether professional or otherwise, was easy and pleasant. His style, though, was not the deliberate informality of the corporate world. He had wide interests beyond mathematics and had interesting things to say on a variety of subjects. His sartorial preferences were conservative. I have never seen him in jeans, and he was seen in a t-shirt but rarely. He was not averse to dressing formally if the occasion demanded it, but he was no conservative on social and political issues. He was of a strongly leftist persuasion and was unequivocal in his condemnation of the caste system and the Hindu rite. In recent years, he was much distressed at the decline in our country of the values that he held dear. Mathematics, his magnificent obsession, kept him from sinking into greater despondency. The manner in which he kept up with recent developments in mathematics right till the end was truly amazing. He was, of course, a professional mathematician. Yet his excitement with mathematics was reminiscent of the little boy on the seashore in Newton's famous self-assessment. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Professor Vijayaraghavan, so just please address.
Well, I'm very sorry. I went into another meeting, but I've stepped out briefly. This is a very sad occasion for us to lose Professor Narasimhan. To us as students, when we joined TIFR, he and all his mathematics colleagues were a great inspiration. We used to often join them at the tea table at the West Canteen, the biologists, and slowly the table used to accumulate with biologists and the mathematicians used to be driven away. But nevertheless, for the period when we were together, we learned a lot, and I hope the flow of information in the other direction was also significant. In particular, the meetings where Narasimhan, Divakaran, and Ramdas were together were very interesting for us. Not that we understood too much about the mathematics, but the topics often used to drift into other areas. Later on, when Narasimhan went to ICTP, he kept in touch when he came to Bangalore, visited Bangalore periodically, but he was absolutely invaluable when on one occasion he sought me out and asked whether we would like to follow up on a neuroscience program at ICTP. And this was a second phase of a program which Obaid Siddiqui and others had started on what was then called neurophysics. So Professor Michael Bate at Cambridge, Veronica Rodriguez at NCBS at TFR, and I started a neurogenetics school and neurodevelopmental biology school at ICTS, and that went really well for every other year for about 10 years. And that was a time when we used to go there, see him. He then had come back to Bangalore after some time, but Ramdas used to be there, and it was really invaluable in terms of training students all over the world in neuroscience. One of the very important successes of mathematics at TIFR has been its relationship with and developing and implementing the programs of the National Board for Higher Mathematics. And that is something which has been extraordinarily impactful, which we have seen now in terms of the spread of mathematics in the country. And in some ways, that belies the accusation against TIFR mathematicians of being elitist. The high quality and standards which the School of Mathematics has maintained is not to be confused with elitism. And the fact that they are not elitist is shown by the spread of the National Board of Higher Mathematics. I think in terms of remembering Professor Narasimhan, his efforts at Bombay, then at Bangalore at the TIFR Center for Applicable Mathematics, at IISc, and at Trieste, all of that we should remember by expanding the programs of the NBHM in a manner where its reach is much wider. And that is something which we tried to start and discuss a couple of years ago with Mahan at TIFR and others. And I'm sure that despite the interventions of this horrible pandemic, we will be able to take that off. That program, which takes mathematics to school children, college children all over the country, and revive a situation where, just as Sheshadri and Narasimhan benefited from their mentor, Professor Racine, in a similar manner, children all over the country should benefit from the best mathematicians and mathematics being accessible to them. And it's really very important. We're going through a period in science and technology where the focus is on career development. And of course, that should be the consequence of what we do, not just the purpose of what we do. And if that is the consequence and not the purpose, and if the purpose is deep understanding of natural sciences and mathematics, then we will actually benefit not only by having people who have extraordinary careers, but make deep contributions in natural sciences and mathematics. Expanding on that front would be a great tribute to Professor Narasimhan. Thank you very much.
Vijay Raghavan, as all of you know, Professor Vijay Raghavan is a principal scientific advisor to the Government of India. And so it's been really very nice to have had him after all this problem. Okay, so we'll now end the meeting with a series of video clips taken from interview of Narasimhan. Photographs in the presentation by Nitin Nitsure were obtained from the TIFA collection, the collected papers of MS Narasimhan, and the interview by Sudhir Rao in the Bhavana magazine, October 2018. We are given the link for the very nice interview of Narasimhan. And Bhavana magazine, incidentally, is run by Professor C.S. Aravinda, a colleague at TIFA CAM. The quotation of Narasimhan on slide 2 is from an interview by Sudhir Rao in the Bhavana magazine, October 2018, the same interview. Okay. Yeah. We are most grateful to the many collaborators, students and friends of Narasimhan who sent us videos and messages. Technical support for this memorial meeting was provided by V. Nandagopal, my colleague, D. Satyanarayana, the TIFA lecture data staff, in particular Rajesh Mistry and Anish Pandya. Yeah, of course, we are really sorry for, it just shows how complicated technology can be if you are trying to handle different machines at the same time. But yeah, I empathize with them. We thank the School of Mathematics office staff for the secretarial help. On behalf of the organizing committee and all the participants, our heartfelt condolences to the family of Professor Narasimhan. Narasimhan was totally committed to all institutions of which he was a part of, ensuring that the institutions function and grow, keeping the best practices in mind. Above all, he was completely dedicated to mathematics. He pursued it with a childlike enthusiasm till the very end. Many of us benefited greatly from interactions with him. We will miss him greatly. We pray for peace and comfort for the loved ones and offer our condolences to you. Now, as I said, the program will end with a few video clips of about 10 minutes duration, so that with the end of the video, that's the end of the program. We thank the following for giving the permissions to show these excerpts. Eureka with MS Narasimhan, which is Rajya Sabha TV. The Mathematician by Choice. These are conversations with Professor MS Narasimhan, episodes 2 and 4, Robin Reels Productions. So thanks to everyone on behalf of the organizing committee, which consists apart from myself, Nitin Nitsure, Ram Das, and Raghunath. Thank you.
On the other hand, there was a sort of big thing going on algebraic geometry, authentic. We'll talk about it later. Right. I knew that was very important, but I was not directly involved, but I was sort of looking at it from a slightly distant place, not directly involved. On the other hand, Seshadri was quite involved with some of them. Then I fell ill seriously. I had to spend a few months in the Alps and so on. So at that time, the Codera-Spencer paper on deformations of complex structure, not the one as I said earlier, has come out. And in a preprint form, huge preprint like this. And Schwartz has received a copy of the preprint. And then he gave me as a reading matter the Alps. And that made a big difference, because that's the new techniques which go into many of my work was from that paper. And one good thing was, for me, it used not complex so much, several complex variables, in spite of the name. It used partial differential equations, elliptic equations. Since I was familiar with elliptic equations, thanks to Schwartz, I had no problem in reading all that. That was again a small, like otherwise, elliptic PD and so on. I mean, you may get lost. So I mean, that's the other one. And later I work with Kotake. And also more important for me, that stay in those places. You see, there were people from different, students usually, from different walks of life.
Yeah.
People from working class or bourgeoisie, but everybody was ill, so they were all equal. So,
In the hospital.
yeah, it's a kind of sanatorium. So we are all equal in the sense. So as I said, one good thing which happened was I came into contact with people of different social strata, from haute bourgeoisie to working class people, which, for example, doesn't happen to us today. I mean, even here.
Yeah.
Just because of the particular place I was there, all were similar problems and so on and so forth. And also I got to know what were their problems and what were their aspirations and so on. And one thing which I remember is, I mean, there was a working class person who was preparing for exam in one of the haute école, which means something even bigger than these IITs and so on. So I used to teach him some mathematics, and he passed. That means, you know, he goes from completely one class to another class. So he was very happy. And when he got married, he asked me to be his best man. The Department of Atomic Energy, for some historical reasons, Baba being the first chairman and Casey being there, was the one which was supporting mathematics.
Right.
Very substantially in Tata Institute and later IMSC, I know HRA and so on and so forth. But that support went to some particular institution with which this department was associated.
Right.
Then for some reasons, one thought, and it's a more complicated story, but quickly I'll say, there should be a government organization which also gives support for mathematics in institutions outside the ambit of DAE. And I must say at that time, the chairman of the Atomic Energy was very much for it. And then when we thought of what kind of organization should be made, what this should do, the person with whom I had interacted was a joint secretary in DAE. He was not even science background, economics. He got really involved. See, one thing I found at that time was there's respect for mathematics in India. Not in many countries. Anyway, they all, even the name National Board was suggested by the Joint Secretary. So what it does, as you know, it's not right for you, it gives, I mean, support for development in mathematics. I mean, for scholarships, fellowships, and conferences, and also some particular institutions, you know. There may be one or two mathematicians in a small isolated place. For me, it was the most satisfying, one of the most satisfying periods, because many mathematicians, especially from China, who are now big mathematicians in China, they all benefited by that. So as you know, I'm sort of generally interested in developing mathematics in India as well as developing countries. When I was in India, East National Board and so on, I could do. When in Trier State, I had a, I mean, larger kind of audience. And I know, with Salam,
there are people like Grothendieck who approach mathematics in a certain way. There are others who are problem solvers who do it in a different way and so on. I suppose you admire Grothendieck without any reservations. And do you think that's the right kind, that's the only kind of thing that should be done? So
no, I'll talk about Grothendieck. Okay, first. I don't think there's only one way of doing mathematics, okay? As you said, there are two kinds of mathematicians, which even not only you and Grothendieck says, one are problem solvers and one are theory builders. He gives an example. Suppose you have a nut and you want to separate the kernel from the whole thing. He says there are two ways of doing it. One is to take a hammer and then hit it and come out. The second is to soak it in some liquid. After some time, you can simply peel off. Okay? So the first is the problem solvers, and the second is, problem solvers also need some capacity. While Grothendieck is the second kind. Now, so what is important about Grothendieck in my view, and also I say how I had to sort of come to terms with Grothendieck in some sense and use it. So, as you know, she was an amazing mathematician who revolutionized algebraic geometry and gave techniques and as well as ideas in algebraic geometry, which helped to solve problems in number theory, like Fermat's last theorem and so on. Now, everybody will say he is very abstract, okay? The point I found was, when I studied him, he never uses too much generality. He uses some of the right kind of generality and abstraction, okay? And the other thing I found was, this will look like a sort of controversial statement. Grothendieck has made algebraic geometry easier.
If you have talent for mathematics, don't waste it. By which I mean, don't dissipate it doing something else which doesn't really do justice to your capacities. Though you may feel, okay, you may be better off. So then take and go into some research problems or whatever to try to do research. And let me also tell you, you means the young people, you know, you can have a good life and good standard of living if you are a mathematician. Don't let people think. And also you can do what you want. In some sense, you can be intellectually, you can be very satisfied. Try to first learn the basic language of modern mathematics. And then read really great classics and textbooks. And then, as I said earlier, go anywhere in the world to get all the knowledge and techniques. And then try to somehow come back
and contribute
to the country. Approach the problem from as sophisticated or as high point of view you're capable of. In other words, look from the top. And then try to...
And you are talking about intellectual.
I mean, you should somehow try to learn to discard the useless information and keep what is the core. Then only you can attack.
Okay. We are closing the program now. Sincere thanks to everyone for all the help.